Good day, good people. This is the Real Life Real Estate Investing Show where we talk about real life real estate situations, but we bring you real life real estate solutions. I'm your host, Glenn Glasper, affectionately known as Mr. Dollar Out of a Dime. And I have, again, yet an awesome guest. I have an awesome guest that's going to be sharing with us some phenomenal information today. Actually, we are streaming live on Facebook as well as on Clubhouse. Now, I'll be honest, for those of you that are joining us on Clubhouse, I have no idea what I'm doing on Clubhouse. I'm still figuring that part out. But if if you happen to jump in, listen in over there. But I have my guest today is Mr. Andrew Gurvey. Mr. Andrew Gurvey is, I would venture to say, one of the most sought after closing attorneys in the Atlanta metro area. I've done some business with him, and I know quite a few other investors that I am familiar with has done a ton of business with him. And he is an educator. He teaches us quite a bit about what we do right and what we do wrong in closings, and that's what we need as investors. So I'm going to bring him up without further ado and have him. We're going to get more into sharing some wisdom and knowledge about some of the things that he can be helping us out with as it relates to getting our deals done. Andrew, thank you so much. I know you could probably be closing another 100 deals in this hour that you're spending with me today, but I thank you for taking time out of your day. But go ahead and tell the folks a little bit about yourself, and who you are, and what you do, and then we'll get right into the information.
Sure. I'm a Georgia licensed attorney. My practice is primarily real estate. I've been practicing for about 20 years. Prior to that, I have a background in social work where I was doing child abuse investigations. Started going to law school at night. I've worked for the Superior Court and the Family Court. Spent a year doing drug trafficking prosecution for the Fulton County DA's office.
Wow.
In between the real estate meltdown across the world, I worked for a couple other law firms. Managing their title departments, handling foreclosures, litigation, evictions, and dealing with excess funds for foreclosures and tax sales, mobile homes, retiring titles, resurrecting titles, and a little bit of probate and workers' comp involved in all of it. But I had my practice all along, done some consulting with some of the title insurance companies, giving them opinions of title and real estate across the state, and my own practice I've had here in Atlanta. We do closings all across the state of Georgia. So I live here in town. I grew up in Atlanta. I have 3 daughters, a new beagle that's the result of this pandemic. and occasionally raising chickens in my backyard. So
wow.
There you go.
So true Georgia boy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's we talk about that. It's very rare. Most people you talk to nowadays, not very many of them are from Georgia. And not very many people that I know raise chickens, but that's a good thing. You have a adventurous, I'll say, resume, nonetheless, especially with the adding of the raising chickens. That might be something I might want to know something about. Even though I don't eat chicken, I might want to know how to raise them to see how that works out.
Right. And also a time where I had my federal firearms license, and we were working on exporting firearms and ammunition to West Africa, but that's a completely different story.
Wow. That's interesting though. That's interesting. So let me ask you this now, 20 plus years as an attorney, is this something that, like real estate, is that something that, I know you said you had some, some things in other areas that you worked on. What was it about real estate that made you want to becoming a closing attorney?
Well, initially it was the only job that was offered to me. I came out of law school, was doing criminal law. I really wanted to do family at the time. I couldn't find anybody to take me under their wing. And there was a firm out in Edenton, Georgia, that was doing real estate closings. So I decided to do that, was commuting an hour and a half there and back every day. And it was at the refi boom in 2000. So I was doing mobile closings, taking a stack of files and driving across the state, closing in Waffle Houses or on the back of the truck, and then grabbing the next file and then driving to the next town to do the next closing. So I thought that it was a lot of fun, and but I thought there was a better way of doing it, and that's when I decided to, hang up my own shingle. It's a mix of solving puzzles, a lot of direct contact with people, which I enjoy. It's that interaction, and it's a nice mix, and the not a lot of confrontation.
Right.
For practice of law and doing transactional work, generally we're there making people happy.
Definitely. Got get you out of the prosecutor way of being a prosecutor.
There's still interesting stories, but
I'm sure.
not the it's not the one of, he didn't realize he had his cell phone on him when he was going out to bury the body, or I didn't realize what was in that package in the backseat of the car.
Right.
No.
So now that you bring that up, I'm curious. What is one of the most interesting things that you've had happen as at a closing, for a closing that you've done?
It all depends on what level you're talking about. I mean,
I'm sure you have stories for days.
It's when I've worked for other attorneys, it's been, I can do this with my hands tied behind my back, my eyes closed.
Yes.
Relatively quickly. I've gone into closings and been out in 10 minutes and go to the partner of a firm that I was working for and say, okay, I'm done. I'm ready for the next one. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they just don't, understand how quickly it can be done. I was doing closings for HUD and Fannie and Freddie. We were, there were times where I was doing 4 or 5 closings at the same time.
Wow.
And, that was really kind of that was an experience. Interesting stories are, there's name affidavits for certain loans. And, when you're passing documents between husband and wife and, it lists everybody's aliases or the names that are all showing up on, somebody's credit report. There was one once where, a bunch of names showed up for the wife, and the husband, didn't recognize a couple. And she forgot to tell him at some point that she was previously married. That was a nice closure at the closing table. There's always something, but we do our best to calm things down and just get people to sign on the dotted line.
Wow. So that's why attorneys get the title counselor as well, huh?
Actually, I don't know if he's in the Clubhouse. Not sure if he's listening in on it. There was one closing where we were having to have a power of attorney signed by the father. Went to the house, met the daughter. Ends up, sadly, he was on chemo meds. He had cancer, was essentially in hospice in their house. Knew what was going on, but not in the best of shape. When we were having him sign the power of attorney and a couple closing documents, and we went into the kitchen to discuss it with the investor who had the deal that he was trying to get everything written up, and the daughter. And we said, okay, we've got this. There's just these couple pages. We went back into the living room where the father was, in a makeshift bed to get him to sign. And he was laying there with his eyes open, not moving and not responding.
Wow.
And we, it's just like, did he just die in the last 10 minutes?
Wow.
And it wasn't until, the daughter started yelling at him that he suddenly just sort of, woke up and then we got him to sign the papers and we went from there. But
wow. That is
So,
something else.
I worked for a lender once that had me go out to get some papers signed, and the borrower broke their leg, and ended up in the hospital. And the lender was asking me to go to the hospital to get them to sign. And I said, they just broke their femur. There's no way I'm going to the hospital with them on all these pain meds and getting them to
Right.
sign documents. I don't think it would be binding. So. We try to bend over and be flexible and work outside the box, but there are certain things that we can't do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned these things. Like, these are the things that, and I always talk about real life real estate investing. Like, there are stories behind all of the different aspects of things that we do. Investors, attorneys, lenders, insurance people. There's so many different things that happen as a result of being in the business that we're in. And, these are the things that people don't see on TV. These are
Real estate is not so bad. I mean, you
right.
end up, the people that are trying to commit fraud. I've dealt with a couple situations over the last few years where people, were posing as the owners of companies that they recreated. That was one that was referred to, ended up going to DeKalb County Police Department, ultimately to the GBI, and then to the FBI, who were handling the case and prosecuting. But that was a mess. A couple of years, and we're still dealing with, I think, one property that the owners don't know that they don't own it. But that'll hopefully come out this year.
Wow. So the owners don't know that they don't own it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How does something like that happen?
Well, there was a mortgage company in the city of Atlanta that got involved in basically like a Ponzi scheme a number of years back. And when that company sort of fell apart, they worked out a deal with the feds and started paying off investors, but they ended up with a handful of properties back. I found the company and a handful of the properties, did research over a few months, tracked down the family and the estate that was dealing with all the properties. But at the same time, it had been so many years since the company existed that a gentleman in Atlanta, who I won't identify, he essentially went to the Secretary of State and reformed the company. When a company's been dissolved for 5 years, fifth year, the name becomes available. And apparently, an attorney, anybody should know, is that if a company owned the property in 2001, and then the company dissolved in 2002, in 2008, the new company isn't necessarily the same company that owned the property back then. It's just the same.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they missed that at a very prominent, firm that deals with a lot of investors here in Atlanta. And I called to ask them, as these transactions started showing up on the real estate records, what was going on and who was signing, because I saw the names were different. And they're the ones that alerted the police after they closed too. There were 2 other attorneys involved that missed it as well. Ultimately, I had worked out something to where the estate had deeded over to all the properties to the nonprofit I was doing work for. So the nonprofit had legal title to all these properties, 8 of which there were, 4 of which we settled with the title insurance companies. Well, 3 we settled with the title insurance companies on claims. There's 1 outstanding. But this 1 outstanding, I talked to the closing attorney. I talked to the owner at the time who had bought this house in West End and was renovating it. She bought it for a small amount of money, put another $150,000 into it, and then sold it, back, what was this, in 2017, for $360,000-$70,000. Now, with the market some 3 years later, I'm sure the house is, $450,000 to $600,000. I mean, it was beautiful.
Wow.
And I tried to, I was notifying everybody of what was going on. But I think what happened was that the owner builder at the time, rather than dealing with the title issues, had a policy with the closing attorney and went forward, and the issue was missed at the next firm.
Mm,
And we've notified everybody behind the scenes of what was going on. They just never told the owners who bought and financed it for 300 and something thousand. So they're still on the hook. The real estate records don't reflect the clear title,
mhm.
but they will shortly.
Wow. Wow.
Uh,
So does the mortgage company get involved in anything like that, in the due on sale clause or anything like that when something like that happens?
Not necessarily in the due on sale clause. They would have a title policy with the insurance and the title
Mhm.
insurance company for
Okay.
the loan. Most likely, the title insurance company would exercise their options of how to resolve it and not pay it out, but look to settle with whomever they would have to resolve the title issue. And
Wow. Wow.
ultimately, on behalf of the nonprofit that has the true interest in the property, we're willing to settle.
Mhm.
We don't necessarily want the house, but
Right.
there's a problem with the title for sure.
Wow. Wow. That is interesting. I mean, because I've seen all sorts of different title situations and nothing quite like that, but I've
This was
seen
an
there was.
issue up on NPR a few years ago.
Mhm.
It ended up which I'd heard it before, of a guy that was reforming companies and selling off properties that had dormant taxes, and he found out because one of the properties, they're all churches in like Ohio or Indiana,
Mhm.
and one of the churches hadn't transferred the taxes into their nonprofit, and they were still paying taxes. So when they didn't get a tax bill, they asked the assessor what was going on and realized that somebody sold it. And
Mm.
he had millions of dollars that he had stolen from different organizations and sort of disappeared into the woodwork. Fraud takes on many different uh, looks and shapes. It just depends on what you find. It's not just somebody forging a signature or claiming that they're the only heir of their parents when were 8 siblings that are deceased.
Wow. Wow. That's it. And like, it's so interesting. You see things like this happen when there's a paper trail. Like, how can you expect not to have someone find out these things? That.
Most of the investors are, and I see this a lot, is that they're not so concerned about, I mean, they just want to get to the finish line. So a lot of people are pushing it through, and some of the larger firms are so busy that they don't have the time to look
Mhm.
as closely as they should. So it happens.
Right. And even after you get the money, so most of the time people squander the money and don't have money for representation when it's time to.
Right.
That's so interesting. So tell me this: what is it that you do at your firm? My firm. I know you do closings, but is there any other detailed type of business that you offer at your firm?
So primarily we do real estate transactions, commercial and residential.
Hmm.
We also help facilitate probate matters when they come up on a title. We'll do incorporations and formations of companies for clients. We'll handle some wills and some estate planning, form trusts, real estate trusts, with if necessary, for clients. We do a lot of sort of back and forth, facilitating of transactions,
Hmm.
helping investors, understand what needs to be done.
Hmm.
It's a lot of moving parts, but we do, double closings. We do triple closings. I've done a quadruple closing.
Oh
We
wow.
work uh, assignments. We do short sales. We do subject to transactions, and everything in between. Whether it's a little sliver of land, or I've worked on a hunting tract that was probably about 3,500 acres,
Mm,
to
wow.
a warehouse in Savannah on the river. Anything real estate related, we do.
Interesting, interesting. That is great stuff. Now, you said something that I definitely want to come back to. You said something about helping investors, and I know a lot of times we do need help. But let me ask you this: what is it that you don't do at your firm?
I don't give business advice. You
Okay.
know, I work with a lot of people. I talk to them all the time, and it's something is like, well, they'll ask me, well, what should I do? And I can't tell you, what that property should close for. I have somebody at the table, that's getting a loan, and they ask me, turn to me and they ask, is this a good loan?
Mm-hmm.
And not my place. And
Right.
I've seen somebody I can only guess has good credit with a really low interest rate, and I see somebody that is struggling and pulling out dollars and crumpled dollars out of a pocket and out of a wallet to pay for closing costs, and maybe he's got a high interest rate. So
Wow.
tell people you've got the best interest rate that this lender can give you. Or it's a variety, but I don't do that. I don't. We do our best professionally not to disclose information to outside of a contract. It's called privity of contract. So if you've got an A to B closing and a B to C, I do not share information in between. If the wholesaler or investor if there's a double closing, is disclosing stuff, or I'll say, look, the end buyer's lender is requiring this. If I
Right.
don't give it, they're not going to fund it. It's
Right.
up to you, but I need authorization to release this information.
Right.
We're doing that, and I do a little bit of teaching when necessary,
Mm-hmm.
explaining how a tax deed works to somebody. When they think that they've got a seller that's going to, sell the property for only a few dollars. But I don't do any real, investor mentoring.
Got it.
We're a law firm. I also don't like being the person to deliver bad news. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if you've got an issue with one of your, um, you know, buyers, with one of your sellers, the attorney isn't the guy that you throw in to
Right.
deliver bad news.
Sounds better coming from you because you're the attorney. You
I
know it
can
all.
tell them and they ask, hey, why can't we close? And the answer is close. It's just that your seller's got no money,
Right.
or buyer's got no money, or hey, the reason we can't close is that the seller, the seller doesn't have the authority to sell.
Mhm.
That's not a good thing. But there are a handful of times where investors are asking me to get a seller to cooperate, get a buyer to cooperate.
Mhm.
That's not really our role. I don't threaten people.
Right.
Uh, I was asked a couple weeks ago to send somebody a demand letter that they dropped their lien, and I said, we can do this, but you're going to sign an engagement letter. I'm going to get a retainer fee,
Right.
and this is only for giving this. And if they don't respond, then I'm going to need another retainer fee. Bring in another attorney to handle the litigation, and we're talking about $5,000 to $15,000.
Right.
I said, it's like, look, I don't send threatening letters unless we're going to follow through.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, it didn't turn out the way they wanted it. And in the meantime, this person also didn't disclose to me that the seller was already being sued by somebody over the property. And I was like, it would be completely inappropriate for me to step in and send a demand letter to the plaintiff that they dropped their case and their lien against this guy. I'm
Right.
like, not going to step in and do that. But
That.
we're generally flexible. We're very investor friendly.
Yeah. That's interesting. And now I want to go back now, and then you said you have to teach investors sometimes, right? And I know, again, as I mentioned earlier, I know sometimes, those of us that are investors, we a lot of times we don't spend enough time educating ourselves on the right things to do. And one of those ways is spending time with guys like you. I know when I got started, I used to go to closings and just sit in and listen to what the closing attorneys were talking about, and just getting an idea of what the information that was being shared was, what was all about. What is something that you've had to share with an investor that you probably think we should have known before coming to closing?
It's a little bit of everything.
Right.
Depends on the situation. It should be that, the seller, the party should know what property they're selling.
Right.
I've
At
been
the very least.
right. I've been at a closing where it's like, okay, the legal description is, several acres of land. And they said, well, I'm not selling all the property. And I'm like, well, how would I know that? Your contract says, this.
Yes.
And they're like, well, we have a survey and we're only selling off this part of it. And I'm like, when did you give that to us? And why isn't that part of the contract?
Wow. Wow.
So disclosures of, elements of the contract, people change it's kind of interesting that everybody wants, to have an enforceable contract and legally binding documents when everything goes to hell.
Yeah.
But nobody is really concerned about it until then. So you never know when something's going to fall apart, but it's like, oh, well, we changed the purchase price. Oh, well, we changed this term. Oh, we changed the closing date. As if, did you put that in writing? And, oh, we'll get that to you. So little things like that, that they should know, or, that they didn't deliver earnest money, or that, they're trying to figure out financing and playing around with the sales price and maybe a kickback that shouldn't be on there. And don't tell the closing attorney about that kind of.
Okay.
It's not one of, oh, I want to sell this property to Glenn for, for $300,000. And then I'm going to give him a $200,000 credit closing. And I said, so the property's only worth $100,000. Well, we want $300,000 to show up in tax records. Well, why? Because we want a comp for 2 other houses we have down the street. And I'm like, yeah, that's fraud.
Right. All day, every day, that's fraud.
No, but I mean, that happens. I mean, when you see sales in certain neighborhoods these days, you certainly got to question whether or not it's a legitimate sale. Most of the education comes from nuances about, some probate that, somebody's on title with their mom, or they're trying to sell their parents' house, and how probate works. Or, the other day, a gentleman was selling a house somewhere in Georgia, new investor, and but he knew that the seller had it through a tax deed. So before we went any further and before we opened up a file, I said, let me look at things. I'll call you back. And I started pulling up records and looking at the title and taxes and everything. And, 2009, this seller bought a tax deed, and he's done nothing since.
Wow.
I said, look, this is your payoff. It's just under $2,000. He's selling it to you for $2,000, but somebody could come up tomorrow and say, I'm here to redeem the property, and here's the payment. And, you are statutorily bound to, accept payment and release your interest.
Absolutely.
If there was a barment of that, and we started talking about barment and the barment process and the redemption, and you need a quiet title action.
Right.
Those are all basic things, but it's certainly not something that is inherent when you hear about tax sales and you can get property cheap, or things like that.
Right. Should an investor, even at the basic level, should we understand what a HUD statement is and how to read one? Is that something you think we should know about?
It's funny. I come across people that are in this business.
Or settlement statement. I guess I should say settlement statement.
Yeah. It's closing disclosure, depending on where you are in it. But a lot of people don't really know the basics.
Hmm.
I think the basics would be understanding, what a contract is, what terms have to be in there for it to be legally binding.
Hmm.
An assignment, what is an assignment and what terms and elements you're looking for. And then really the closing statement of, how to read one.
Right.
That, when a party tosses one to you, in any form and they're all basically the same. They're
Right.
going So it's an accounting ledger. So, it's going to have all the things that somebody owes, all the things that somebody has credits for, and then it will add and subtract them together.
Hmm.
Just different formats. So, one number somewhere may not be the bottom line.
Hmm.
And, that's the basics that an investor should certainly know. Or that, there's standards for a closing. It's changed over the years. Go back 10 years,
Hmm.
and it was fairly standard for sellers to pay certain fees and it's become pretty expected right now that a buyer will pay all the closing costs,
Hmm.
transfer tax, the recording charges, in our transactions. And we see it time and time again, other than maybe having to just search for a water bill or things like that, the seller has no fees. You know,
Hmm.
we, we don't charge a post-closing fee or junk fees like that. We just, all of those kind of things are just included in what we charge as attorney fees. So ours are pretty simple. Some are more complicated. The simplest would be an old school settlement statement that's just on firm letterhead. Then the next would be the HUD statement that was used up until the last number of years,
Right.
and it's now an ALTA form that some people will hear. And then the more complicated is, there's the CD, the closing disclosure,
Hmm.
because the government had to make it more complicated.
Right. So for someone that hears, and I had to, remind myself that it's not used anymore much. For someone that hears HUD statement, closing disclosure, settlement statement, you're like, what would be the major thing that you would say that those persons need to understand that is the major difference between any of these documents, or is there any difference?
There are lots of differences. The closing disclosure is what's required for any conventional loan.
Hmm.
Um, so if you're getting a loan with your bank down the street, they're going to use a closing disclosure form,
Hmm.
and that's the standard now. Law firms will also have an associated ALTA statement form, which was the American Land Title Association, and that is similar in format with different columns for, like the old HUD statement. HUD statements, ALTA statements, closing disclosures like a regular ledger are frequently used in, non-conventional loans, investor loans,
Hmm.
cash transactions. It's a simple format. The programs that people use for closing software already have them built in. For investors, the majority that we do nowadays, just because my staff are more familiar with them, are the old HUD forms.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
for a while I was doing it myself, we were using just closing statements, commercial closing statements that were essentially on letterhead. It would show a line item of, sales price, and then credits, and then debits, and then just have a bottom line of what the seller would get back, and the similar form for the buyer, but they were separate. So a seller and buyer would never see each other's numbers.
Mhm.
And we can do that with a HUD statement as well, to keep some things private, things like assignment fees, or
Mhm.
other payments at closing. That's a good thing to use those for.
Okay, good deal. So in that case, would a double closing be necessary?
Um, yes. Well, it
Okay.
depends on what your questions are.
Okay.
So, so a double. I guess the other thing is A double closing are usually where the first one is an A closing, the second one is referred to as a B2C.
Mhm.
The common person in the middle is usually the investor, wholesaler, who is buying low and selling high. Typically, I've never seen one where they buy low and sell even lower.
Right.
But it's used to keep the numbers apart, so that seller doesn't necessarily know. They may know that the investor is flipping it, or if they're selling it for 100,000, that when the investor turns around and sells it to somebody else for 125,000, 130, 200,000, that sales price is not something that's seen. So it keeps those separate. And then the money they make is the difference between their profit or their sales price on the end and the cost to acquire. I typically advise people, and you would know yourself being in this industry, that there's a number that most people are okay with as an assignment fee. So I am buying a property for 100,000 and turning it around to you, and I'm assigning it for 5,000, 6,000. Most people aren't going to balk at that if they see a number on a settlement statement. 30,000.
Yeah.
That's something you would
Especially if my mortgage payoff is 100,000 and you're making 30,000 and I'm not making anything.
Right. So it just sort of depends on where those numbers are. And for investors, certainly the thing to know is that, assignment fees have to be disclosed to someone. Somewhere on that settlement statement has to be that fee paid by somebody for you to get paid. And typically it's the buyer. Glenn's going to buy the property from me for 100,000, and he's going to pay a $10,000 assignment fee. The total that you're going to pay is 110. On the settlement statement, there's going to be a sales price of 100,000 that you'll see as the buyer, and that the seller will see as the seller. They may not see that assignment fee, but somebody has to see it. Somebody has to pay.
Exactly. So, just for simplicity's sake, what are I'm paying all the closing costs? What's involved in that? What am I putting myself on the hook for?
It depends on where is that? It depends on what closing attorney you're using.
Okay.
There's a lender that I'm doing some work for out of Florida, and I'm just facilitating the transaction. They're using another law firm here in Atlanta, and there's a $75 post-closing fee to the seller. There's a buyer post-closing fee that the buyer pays for $75, so there's another $150. They're charging about $800 as attorney's fees. Wow. But closing fees, there's going to be some standards. There's going to be an attorney fee of some sort. Georgia's an attorney state. It's either going to be listed as an attorney fee or a settlement charge to be paid to the law firm. There's going to be a title exam of some amount, and then there's going to be transfer taxes and recording costs. That's the basic. There should always be those. In the last, when was it? Somewhere up on my board. The clerks sort of standardized the recording costs. It used to be this strange formula of $2 for every page past the second page. So it was $10 for every document plus $2, then another $2 for every cross-reference. Now it's standardized to $25 a document, unlimited number of pages, unlimited number of cross-references. So that's a little bit easier.
Wow.
You record a deed, it's $25. Most firms are charging an e-filing charge. We charge a small fee for that, so that we don't run to the courthouse to do it. And then transfer tax is based on the sales price. The higher the sales price, the more of a transfer tax that's going to be paid. Ranges of fees, title exams should be anywhere from $150 to $300. Attorney's fees are going to be anywhere from, let's say, $495 up to $800-900, depending on the firm. They break them down into. We charge $500 flat fee, $200 title exam. When you put our settlement statements next to some other firms, and I've had some investors say, we'd love to use your firm, but you need to lower your costs. And I said, well, send us a settlement statement of
someone else.
And they send it over, and I'm looking at it, and somebody's charging less than we are, and I'm looking at everything else, and I'm saying, well, they just break it down. They're charging $450 attorney's fees, but then they've got all these other junk fees on there.
A $300 doc prep fee.
Yeah. It's funny. I called them up and I said, hey, we got that settlement statement. We would love to match their fees. We'll do this to you. You'll send us all the business. Great. Unfortunately, we're going to have to raise our prices by $10 because they're charging $10 more, but we'll match it if you want.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, well, we didn't realize that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but how about we just keep them where they are? We're $10 less, and let's just keep doing business together. So, right. But closing costs can be anything. I mean, there's a standard in most of the statements that like a GAR form of that the seller will pay certain closing costs. Those typically will cover loan fees, things like that. But the basic fees are going to be for facilitating the closing and recording documents.
How about title insurance? Could that be considered as a closing cost that someone would?
Right. So title insurance is now regulated in the state of Georgia to the point of where all the title insurance companies report to the Secretary of State or the insurance commissioner their published rates, and they're all pretty consistent. At a minimum, most title insurance companies will charge $200 for an owner's policy, and that's up to it might be, I forgot what it is, $60,000-70,000 on a purchase price, but it's really looking somewhere around $3.50, $4 per thousand.
Right.
And every property I've bought, I always get it. I know some investors don't, but there's always an investor that comes through my door that won't touch anything unless they get it. It's right. Like that insurance policy. Even if you go to another law firm, they may find something on title that we don't, or take issue with something that's not really an issue, and you wave that policy around, and that typically will insure over and get you through to the next station.
Good deal. So why are you considered an investor friendly attorney? I mean, aside from all the hundreds of things that you mentioned already.
It's so there's probably a couple things. Overall, investor transactions are not always so easy. There's always the seller that's leery of what's going on and not so trusting, and needs an attorney to call and verify that somebody's legitimate, or there's a rapport aspect as well. And some attorneys, I can't tell you the last time I wore a tie, are a little uppity, and don't want to deal with, all of the nuances or problems with title or all of that. And we do, there's occasionally we get thrown files that other law firms don't want to mess with it. They're like, oh, well, if it's not going to be clean, we don't want to deal with it.
Wow.
And look at it and saying, look, there's some things that are going to be messy, but we'll do it, and we'll take the messy ones, we'll take the clean ones.
Right.
But it's I think it's more so when you hear the term investor friendly, it's does the law firm handle assignment transactions? Do they handle double closings? Invariably, there's going to be a real estate agent, somebody out there that's going to say this is illegal, that's not, and frankly, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Even the title insurance companies, at the seminars, I always hear, the underwriters talk about flipping properties and that it be illegal, to buy low, sell high within 5 minutes if you're not doing any improvements to the property.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I talk to them, the reality is, there's nothing that's illegal about it.
Right.
But on the investor friendly side, it's are they handling those types of transactions?
Mm-hmm.
When there is a double closing, does the law firm allow pass-through funding? Some attorneys don't. I've even come across, which maybe you have too, some attorneys that say that they won't allow it, and somehow either they're using their own money or they're pretending to use their own money, that they charge a fee for transactional funding. Which I think is a conflict of interest for them or any associated company to do that. But we allow pass-through funding. We work with lenders and hard money lenders. We'll create documents and we do it all. So
for someone that may not understand, what is pass-through funding and how does that work?
Right. So Georgia is a good fund state. At closing, the buyer is required to come to closing with the funds to close. So Glenn's buying it for $100,000. He needs to show up to closing with $100,000. And now, 2021, that means that you have to wire it. You can't show up with a check. You can't show up with cash in a suitcase. But in a double closing, there's the question. Glenn's buying it for $100,000. Does he need to come up with $100,000 there at closing? If he's turning around 5 minutes later and selling it for $150,000, so pass-through funding is that end buyer, the C and the BC closing, that their $150,000 goes into the trust account for the attorney, and it pays for Glenn's sale of the property. But that time that he's paying for it, Glenn hasn't bought the property yet. So that transaction essentially is happening simultaneously. Pass-through funding would be referring to that $150,000 flowing through the second transaction to fund the initial transaction. And that is certainly possible, essentially by agreement of the parties. The parties agree that money can be used in the acquisition of the property, and that all of the money, all of the documents being signed are held in trust by the closing attorney until everything shows up at the same time. We call it an escrow agreement. Some people call it a dry closing. It's all semantics. But it allows somebody, essentially, you always hear you can buy property with no money down. This is one of the ways that's handled, and we maintain all the documents that everybody signs that keeps it kosher.
Great stuff. That is certainly good to know, because I know that is something that a lot of newbie investors, most experienced investors should know that, but a lot of newbie investors don't get the real nuance of I can buy a property, no money down, knowing that someone else's funds can actually fund the transaction. So that's certainly something good for them to know. How does an investor start working with your firm? So if I'm new and I want to close a deal with you, how do I do that?
It's
what do you require? Since you won't take my $100,000 in the briefcase, what do I have to give you?
That's a completely different type of arrangement,
right?
But better call Saul.
Right.
But it starts with the investor really having business that they need us to handle. It's it's somebody that's gone out, gotten a property under contract, and coming to us with a plan. It's not just them putting it under contract, but I always ask them, what's your plan? Are you buying this for yourself? Are you going to flip it? Are you going to wholesale it? Do you have a loan? Are you paying cash? Getting all those nuances and then saying, all right, where are you in this process? Because there are certainly a number of people that don't get the numbers right, and they can't find a buyer. because they're paying too much for it, or that they get an uncooperative seller who said, yeah, I'll sell it to you, but you got to do it first, or I'm going to sell it to somebody else, and I'm signing multiple contracts. So to start with us, it's writing us in as the closing attorney. It's getting us the documents. It's emailing it to us at closings@gurveylaw.com. It's sending in the seller information forms, the buyer information forms, getting us the contact information for all the parties involved. So when we get all the documents, that we send out, an email to the parties. Hey, welcome. Thanks for working with us. Please complete this form, get it back to us. And then we start, looking at the taxes, looking at the title, and going from there. If we're holding earnest money, we need an agreement for the parties to sign, authorizing us to hold earnest money by certain terms. There's eventually going to be a dispute if it doesn't close. So we need to know, what that process is and how everybody wants to handle it. But pretty simple. It's just getting the documents in the right order, everything signed properly, getting us the information and emailing it in, and then we take it from there.
Okay, good stuff. Now, and I guess these documents are something that you'll provide to the person that's coming to do business with you. So is there something that they should have in place? Like, for example, their business documents and all those are things that you'll require as well, right?
Yeah, so it depends on what's really kind of going on. We have seller information form, buyer information forms, wiring instructions, all that basic stuff. But, somebody should have their contract signed by all the parties, whether there's an assignment, whatever documents that they're using, we need those. If there's a company involved, we need to know that they're in good standing in whatever state they're formed. If they're doing business here in Georgia, that's easy enough to check. An operating agreement is required for every LLC, bylaws for every corporation, and they should spell out who's able to sign for the company. Typically, I like having that for every buyer and seller that we're doing work with. I find a lot of new investors will have an LLC that they want to buy in, but they may not have the documents. They think that what they've done with the Secretary of State is sufficient, but typically isn't. At least here in the state of Georgia, the requirement is not to list all the members. So you could be on it with your wife. You both could have a 50% interest in the LLC as members. To sign anything, both members might have to sign. Or if it's a single member LLC, all that's going to be contained in the operating agreement. It is public record for corporations who the CEO, president, secretary, treasurer, it's more common these days, of CFO, but it just sort of depends. I always take the position, if somebody is an investor and trying to buy and hold, if they, aren't so compliant and giving us their documents, I'm happy to close in the name of your cat, and put title in the name of, Mr. Buttons. The problem is going to be when you want to turn around and sell it.
Yes.
Don't come back to me and say that, and I've seen this before. Oh, we just filed this company. Here's the name. Well, I need more than that. And ultimately, we'd find out either they rejected the name, or I saw one once. What was it? Somebody misspelled this Georgia on their LLC, and so that was a problem. But you need those documents. Some attorney is going to need to see them when you go to sell the property. So that and a tax ID number. As a seller, you'll need that, but they're pretty basic stuff.
Okay, good stuff. So company resolutions and things like that. So that's basically what you would mean, like who the person that has the permission to sign and all that.
Right. We'd look through the operating agreement, and it would say that it's a single member, a sole member LLC. Then the member should be able to sign for the LLC. We do actually work with some investors that are sending, a bit of business to us, and we have company resolutions to where we have an authorized signer so that they don't always have to come in and sign for the company, and then we can take care of that at closing. They just, we wire funds and send them all the documents, and they're good to go.
Great stuff. Great stuff. So tell me, how does an investor, or what should we know as investors as it relates to due diligence?
Know who you're getting in bed with.
Yeah. Wow. That is a
True
story.
when you're investors come to me with a contract and they're like, hey, this guy signed it. He said he owns the house. He's living in it. Well, it ended up he was a squatter. He lost it, 3 years earlier to a tax sale, and there's a court order that says somebody else owns it.
Mm-hmm.
Or the guy that wants to sell the property, yeah, he might be taking care of it, and he's had it in the family for years, but it's still owned by his deceased parents, or technically their estate. So the due diligence is I think, in a number of different ways. It's finding out, who has the ability, the authority to sign, the competence to sign, and making sure all that's in place. Knowing that if there's an empty property that you're trying to sell as a lot, was there a house on it? Why isn't there a house there now? Did the seller pay a demolition company to take down the house? Or was it something that the city took down and now there's a lien on it?
Oh, yes, yes.
So, in COVID, there's a long process it takes to get, a payoff for a demo lien.
Wow.
It's, again, I happen to have the contacts with the city of Atlanta so that I can get, directly to that department. But even they have to rely on another department that isn't always there in the Department of Revenue to get invoices, and everything kind of trickles down. But those are the due diligence kind of things. Know the value of the property. Know that this property is in a flood zone.
Mm-hmm.
I also purchase property, and I have people that send me stuff, and I've seen the same properties come to me over and over again. And they're like, hey, I got this property. I was like, I've seen these before. They're not buildable.
Right.
This one has a creek running through it. This one has a drop off. Here, I even have pictures on my phone of it. I can't do anything with these lots, and I don't think that you'll be able to sell them either, or that somebody sends them to me, at $30,000 a lot, and then I turn around and get emails from somebody else that they're selling it, for. There's due diligence on the property. There's due diligence on the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And, all around it, it's getting all your ducks in a row to know what you're doing. If you're buying it at the right price, no comps for the area. I think the common now is for a lot of investors not to be giving, estimates for repairs, because those numbers can be all over the place. And certainly investors should know what it's going to cost to fix up a property, because it's going to vary from investor to contractor to whomever. But the due diligence on the front end is know your property. Know that, it's, I've got a map back here of the city of Atlanta. I know where everything is. I've got smaller maps. I think the one down below is a neighborhood that, I'm looking at every single tax parcel. I know the neighbors. I know what they bought it for. I know, flood zones. I know topography. I know school districts. And you can jump online to Google Earth if you're not driving around, and you can see a street view. And when there is a double stormwater drain right in front of that property, and I've shown this to investors. I say, oh, you sent me this. This is great. And it's a great price. I said, but look at it. All the water in the neighborhood is flowing here and right onto this property. That's why they're selling it. No, thank you.
That's why I sold one. I had one like that.
Yeah. And it's or looking at some, there's, I don't know who's in Clubhouse right now, but, I know of a friend of mine, who he's been talking about recently jumped the gun and has a property with a very large stormwater line or a sewer line that goes right through the middle of his property. Uh,
Mm.
and as far as we know, we can't build on it. But
Oh
you know,
yeah, I heard about that one. Yeah.
but if you know those things going into it, then you know how to approach it. You
Right.
know, if you know that the property next door, you know, this was we had a property down on McDaniel in Pittsburgh, and there was a funeral home, and they wanted to buy our property next to it as a meditative garden
Mm.
for, you know, their clients and families.
Interesting.
So it's fine if that's unbuildable, if that's what they want it for. But
Hmm.
if they wanted to build something else, you know, you got to know what you can build on it. Uh,
Right.
you
Right.
know, every once in a while, that might mean that you know, do it, you know, put an investment into it and pay for a survey to
Hmm.
see what the building setbacks are, to see what restrictions are, or go to the water department and find out where the water lines or the sewer is, to see that, you know, that you can do that, because the city isn't going to just connect you up to a sewer if you build a house.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
if you've been in the city of Atlanta long enough, there are still streets around here that aren't paved. There are
Wow.
still
Yes.
don't have sewer on them. And if you're building, the city is going to require you to put in sewer.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen as well. I got another question that came through. And I don't want to keep you. I know we're at our time. One more quick
No,
question you got. Um, what if so there's this deal, and I'm sure you've seen this many times. There's just this idea that people put on their contracts or don't put on their contracts that earnest money is non-refundable. Now my contract reads a little bit differently, but you know, some people always say their earnest money is non-refundable. How do you handle a situation like that where someone wants their money back and it clearly states in their contract that the earnest money is not refundable?
my question would, and we just dealt with this the other day, uh, actually yesterday, and I have an email out to the parties because we're dealing with a GAR form, and I gave them their 10 days notice of how I was going to disperse the earnest money.
Hmm.
But it's, you know, it depends on the situation. As I'll tell everybody that, you know, even if it says that it's non-refundable, if for some reason you as the investor can't acquire the property, I don't think it's fair
Hmm.
to keep non-refundable earnest money. If the guy that you were going to buy the property from can't sell it, he only
Right.
had he didn't have all the interest in the property. He decided not to sell it, and you can't reach him anymore. And that even if you wanted to sell it, you couldn't without suing him. You know,
Hmm.
your BC contract, your flip, you know, how fair is it for you to keep that earnest money? And not even being fair, how legal is it? Even though it's
Absolutely.
non-refundable, you don't have the ability to sell it. And because of that, I think that earnest money needs to be given back.
Hmm.
It's not a question even of legality. I think it's good business.
Absolutely.
And I talk to investors, even seasoned or new investors. You don't want to be, you know, that investor that's just, you know, that sort of earnest money vampire. And
I know a few.
I mean, look, I can tell you, I mean, in a similar state, I mean, and you know, there's this whole idea of doing lease purchases, and you know, you take a large deposit down on your lease purchase, and you don't care whether or not that the tenant is going to ever buy,
Mhm.
because they'll be in it. You've got some cash. They default on it. You evict them. You get the next person in as a lease purchase, and you know, 5 years down the road, you've collected enough more money than what you were going to sell it from in the first place, and you still own
Mhm.
the property.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, that's one approach to investing and doing it,
Mhm.
you know, with that way. But for earnest money, you know, it's non-refundable for the purpose of locking your buyer in
Mhm.
and pushing them to close. But
Right.
part of your due diligence should absolutely be is knowing that your buyer's got the funds to close.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a and I'll share this. I have an interesting clause in my contract that I never have a problem with non-refundable earnest money. That's why some investors don't want to use my contract. But if they're smart, they should. It never
Well,
specifically states whether it's refundable or not. It just says that all parties have to agree, and some parties include my cat or my dog.
does it list cat or dog in there?
No, not specifically. No.
And indirectly, your pets.
Right.
Uh, I mean, there are nuances in a contract. I know some investors that have a clause about certain people, having to sign off on it, and they use that as a way to always get out of a contract.
Mhm.
If they need to back out. But that's I think the important part is that investors, and if you're in this business, the documents that you're using. Every line, what's in them. I made mention to this one investor on the GAR forum. He was asking, is like, well, we were supposed to close on the 15th of January, and I didn't sign off on the 8-day extension. So why would it go out, another week? And I said, well, you agreed to it. I didn't agree to it. It's like, yes, you did. It's
Yes.
in your form. And it's on page 2, this paragraph, I said, you agreed that they could do a unilateral extension for 8 days. And that's what they did. And I said, I hate to tell you, but, and why I'm not sure. I'm sure you believe it's there. And I'm like, yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be dealing with this. But, know your documents.
Yeah,
That's going to be, what you live and die by. And hopefully it's not going to cost you a lot of money.
definitely. I actually have that clause in my contract as well. So I learned a lot from you attorneys. Yeah, but I often don't put properties under contract unless I intend to buy them. And a lot of these guys nowadays have this no due diligence, no non-refundable earnest money. I'm like, I'm not getting into those kind of deals, because at the end of the day, and I guess I just did a post on Facebook. Maybe somebody will see it, maybe they won't. That's the determination that people are making nowadays, and at least this is what I'm thinking on whether or not you're a real cash buyer. If you won't put a property under contract with no due diligence, or if you don't put $5,000 non-refundable earnest money. So I guess that is what's now distinguishing us from real buyers or not these days. And I'm like, how did that ever become a thing?
Yeah, it's some people are desperate, and this is
Hmm.
certainly a seller's market that we're in.
Uh-huh.
At some point, it will shift.
Yeah.
But I realized this, a number of years ago when I'm buying properties, is that the normal due diligence that I would have, because I'd get a survey on every property, and it
Yes.
would, 21, business days to get the survey back. And we weren't
Absolutely.
doing a boundary survey, we're doing a development survey. We're
Right.
getting topography, we're getting everything on there. It's not just, the boundary lines, it's everything. Tree counts. I
Mhm.
know every tree on the property
Right.
that's so many inches in diameter. And that takes a while. Um,
Absolutely.
but but ultimately, what I tell people, it depends on your situation. If you're really doing, building and development, if you've got issues with zoning, you're going to have due diligence, or you're going to be buying blindly.
Absolutely.
Um, but a lot of the due diligence you can do ahead of time. I mean, all the properties that I've bought within the last 4 years, I always tell people, all except for one, which we were waiting on a survey, and we were having to deal with setbacks to a creek. Um, I do all my due diligence up front. I get the address, I'll look at it online, I'll see where the sewer is, I'll see where the sewer lines are, where the setbacks are, the topography, at least from what the municipalities have. And then I check everything out on Google Earth. If there's a question on it, and then I do a drive-by, and then I can put it under contract. If time back there's a problem, if the seller can't sell, I'm not worried about my earnest money. And as a cash
Right.
buyer, I let people know, or they already do know, that we have the cash to close. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
whether I put down, a dollar or 10,000 or whatever, at some point, and we usually have a quick closing date, I've got to come up with the cash anyway.
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
I've always used earnest money more as, a business decision. The one thing I'll add, which I've started, mentioning about contracts, is earnest money is not required in Georgia for there to be a binding contract.
Right.
It's more, a comfort level of the parties to make sure that they know you're serious. And if I'm buying a property for $100,000 and I know I'm going to buy it and I'm going to give the attorney or the realtor $50,000, 50% or 75% of the purchase price, so what?
Right. Right.
If I'm a cash buyer, I've got it.
Definitely.
Buying in volume and moving stuff, maybe that's an issue, but, again, and that's everyone's personal business decision.
No, absolutely. I mean, typically, nowadays, the way I buy properties, I am spending anywhere from, maybe $300 to $500 before we close for me to get my due diligence, for me to do diligence. And typically I do an inspection, depending on where it is. Like you mentioned, I do a survey. If I'm doing any extensive rehab, I might have to have my engineer come out and look at some different things. So there's, a, quite a few different things that I do before closing. And these are expenses. Now, of course, they're the cost of doing business, which I'm okay with, but I'm not going to put $2,000 to $3,000 on the line as non-refundable, and then spend maybe $500 to find out that I shouldn't have given you $2,000 in the first place.
Right.
It's just like.
In 4 years, I've only lost $1,000 in earnest money. And that was one property where we knew that there was a creek running through it.
Mhm.
But there was a question on the back side of it where it looked like there was water runoff fairly regularly, in this one spot that then dumped into the stream.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
question was whether or not that would be listed on a survey as state waters. And with the state waters, it would have another 75-foot setback that would reduce where we could build. And
Mhm.
we had one surveyor that said state waters, absolutely. Another one said no way. And we were waiting on the survey back from the second guy. And, 800 and something dollars later, he gave me a survey that identified it as state waters.
Mhm.
Of which I said, like, we had this conversation, you
Right.
know, and he was like, we looked at it again, and I used these resources, and I was like, all right, so out that for the survey and out the earnest money. And I mean, the requirement would have been to build on the foundation where the burned out house was, and
Oh.
that just wasn't what we wanted to do with the property. So
Mhm.
you know,
Absolutely.
better
Absolutely.
else take it than us.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that a lot of these no due diligence investors, many of them have not done rehabs before, and they don't really have an idea of what it takes to get into the process of understanding what you have to do to prepare for doing a potential rehab, especially if it's a major rehab. So
Right.
them not understanding that process is kind of boggles me when you tell me I can't do due diligence for a property that I'm looking to pay you cash for, and you don't accept my offer because I don't want to do you want to allow me to do at least 5 to 7 day due diligence, and a little bit of earnest money, so they walk away from the deal and let some, what I would consider, in my opinion, unless they're in the contracting business and knowing all of these different things, another buyer that's going to pay cash for something that's very little profit, in my opinion. So
Right. So what's the minimum number of days due diligence that you'll get into, or you
I,
require?
I I would have to say, I mean, because of the system that I have now, I can turn it around pretty quickly. I would say at least at the minimum 5 days. Anywhere between 5 and 7 days due diligence I'd like to have. just to get, if because I'm going to go with the inspection, I'm going to go do with the contractor. I'm going to go, I'd like to see what my inspector schedule is. That's the other thing, that time frame gives me enough time to get on my inspector schedule so that I can get him out to look at the things that I want to, pay the most attention to.
Right.
And, and now, of course, many of these properties I can inspect myself, but I want to know a little bit more of a professional eye before I get into different things that I'm really probably not going to pay that much attention to. So,
right. And I think it's an education. Some people are comfortable with, eyeballing it on their own or figuring out, what the worst case scenario is. And then other people, if they're new in the business, it just depends on where they are.
Yeah.
I've seen houses that were built into the dirt, and those that were on the verge of collapsing.
Right.
But there was years ago. I remember going out in Pittsburgh to look at a house that was on a corner. I think I look back, I should have bought it for $2,000 or $3,000 that the lender was selling it for. But as I'm checking it out, this woman comes out of the neighboring house, with her fuzzy robe and slippers on, asked me if I'm the owner. And I'm like, no, I'm thinking about buying it. And she's telling me how she's worried that the house is going to fall down on her and her house next door. But, they put vinyl siding up on this thing that had the old novelty, wood on it. But, all the vinyl siding was buckling.
Wow.
As the whole house was shifting, the vinyl doesn't really bend well. And I was like, do I really want this? I'm going to have to demolish the house. I'm going to end up with the taxes, back tax. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
But it's, that decision. Now, it would have been what, 15 years of carrying costs.
Wow.
Maybe 1,000 tires dumped on it in that time, and
Definitely.
I mean, it might have been worth it, but someone else, I'm sure, grabbed it and maybe figured a way to keep it from falling down.
Wow.
Wow. Those were the days.
All right. Well, we've come up on our time, but I do have one last question that we can leave with. What advice would you give a new investor?
I'm sorry. What was that?
What advice would you give a new investor?
Do your homework. Don't go into this blindly. Be professional. Make sure that the documents that you are using, and don't burn bridges. It's a small community of people that there's a lot of overlap. You're going to run across some people that have bad days. Bear with people and their personal issues and everything. But there's no reason to, make an enemy. You're going to run into these people again, and be honest.
Absolutely.
That's you can make your money, and don't have a hard line on your profits. Ultimately, whatever you think that you're going to make on a deal may not be what you make, but as long as you're not losing money, there's no reason to necessarily ruin it for other people. If a lien comes up and you don't think you can make your profit, compromise. There'll be another deal down the road. But this is the key thing. The amount of debt and liens on the property don't increase the value of the property for the end buyer.
Right.
Just because that there's a $50,000 demo lien on a property or code violations doesn't mean that translates into the end buyer paying more so that everyone else makes their profit. The value is the value. So
Definitely.
If you're selling it to somebody and something unexpected comes up, it means that maybe everyone else has to reduce their profits or their sales price, but it doesn't inherently mean that the end buyer has to pay more to make the deal work.
True, 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 true. That in and of itself, Mr. Gurvey, is worth thousands and thousands of dollars to have someone understand not to have a hard line on their profits. Because I see people lose deals and walk away from deals all the time for $1,000 or less. You
Yeah.
know, they can't make that hard $5,000 that they want because they've already allocated it for the bills that they're behind on.
Right.
Anything less than that $5,000, how their own house is going to come falling down. At least that's how they act anyway. So,
Exactly.
but listen, thank you so much. I want to give you an opportunity to share with the folks how to reach out to you, how to connect with you, especially, you know, either for information that you can share with them or how they can get in contact with you to do a closing with you.
Sure. I'm personally on Clubhouse. You can find me there, Andrew Gurvey. We will at some point have a TikTok and YouTube and page under Gurvey Law. On Instagram, we're there, Gurvey Law. On Facebook, we have a Gurvey Law page. On the internet, our website, www.gurveylaw.com, GURVEYLAW.com. Contact information is all over that. And the email, phone number, you can find it online. Easiest way.
Great stuff. And listen, once I figure out Clubhouse, I think Tim is actually in the room that I'm in now. Tim, thank you for jumping in. Tim is one of my Clubhouse educators. So once I figure out Clubhouse, Andrew, I want to have you come back with me, and so we can do a Clubhouse rendition of some of the stuff that we covered today. Because I want to have another audience to be able to share some of this information because it was very insightful.
Absolutely.
It's great information, and it's a lot of basic stuff that I think new investors miss. Unfortunately, in many cases, because a lot of the educators that are educating the new investors aren't sharing the specifics of the things that you shared today. So again, thank you for the value and the gems that you've added today. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for watching us today. For those of you that joined me on Clubhouse, please forgive me for not being more experienced with it. I'll figure it out someday. But this is the Real Life Real Estate Investing Show, where we talk about real life real estate situations, but we bring you real life real estate solutions. Look forward to talking to you all soon.